Okay, I'm here doing more of the first movement of the Prokofiev Sixth Sonata. I'm well into the recap, which is short, but I'm fleshing out in this edition, the last page in a little bit, roughly from measure 244, according to my count. So there was some busyness in the left hand. Decided on fingerings that enable me to keep my 3 and 2 on black notes and then turn over to the thumb. I'm a big fan of that kind of comfort created by having the long fingers on black notes. So got suckered into playing an extra A. There's this recurrent A. So I have to make sure my choreography shows me when the repetition is. In other words, that I get used to dropping my arm into the place where the A's exist and not doing so when they don't exist. So I have, this is the downbeat of 245. So I go for it and lift my arm, then I come back down. Before I took a very long break, I was going 1 to then 1 and 2. Right now, again, one of those things that just happens, I'm landing on E and G on 2 and 3, and then moving my hand. I have to repeat something, or it seems as if I went to 1 and 2, I wouldn't, but I'd have to repeat 2. Or I could go to 1 and 3, then I'd still need a 3 or something down there. So I choose to make the most fluent gesture to get me to the downbeat, which has the added advantage of then making me fall back on the chord that has the A in it. So and then okay, that seems pretty good. A detail that I missed is that the next time that there's that turn, my bottom part there, the A is supposed to hold on, whereas the first time this happens, there's a rest on the down, which clears the way. But it doesn't make it more uncomfortable for me, or at least not significantly so, so I'm going to stick with my finger. Here, see, I'm holding on to the 7th with 5, 3, 2. So. I'm just experimenting here. That's right. So. Okay, and the last decision, 246, downbeat. Although I could be turning to 3 and 2 here on E flat G, that seems, that's not bad. Right now I'm just tossing my hand again. In other words, I'm going from thumb to thumb and 3. And since it's inherently non-legato, it gives me a little more comfort. I think, I'm not sure, but I think that's what I'm going to do. Yes, and I use the 3 and 1 elsewhere as well, so that's good. Okay, things are looking good there. Back in the right hand. Sense. I have these CE Bs. 241 is perfect spacing. That's what my body said. most times if I don't approach those chords directly. If I try in any way to take a shortcut and go straight across the keyboard, that's the likeliest way for me to, or anyone else, to miss an octave. So if I approach the keyboard directly, I have the maximum chance of getting it. Into the keyboard, into the A. Okay, that's good. So gives me the page turn. There's an A on top. I have plenty of time to place my hand. Right now, I'm experimenting with placing it without looking, to see that if I needed attention in my left hand, to put it there. Now, of course, right now I need the attention in my left hand because it's more complex in the score. So, if I'm able to put my attention there, then I get a successful going through of that particular thing. I wouldn't call it a run through. It's not fully fluent, but what I am getting is fluency within the groups, which is really what I'm looking for. This one is 14 to 5, which is a little bit odder than the other sensations. Good. Instructions are tremendously important. There we go. You'll need that faith. I'm fighting with every ounce of my being against that because it's so much more exposed than most of the other sensations. But we'll see if it works, or if I find it consistent enough to trust. Let's see. This A resulted from a pedal. So. You see how fitful that was. I was curious to know whether there was fluency in the extended passage. There wasn't. So I've got to go back and review what will make me comfortable. And play it more slowly, of course. And this, I see, involves tossing my hand from thumb to thumb. So I have to the beat each time, the strong beat, the first and the third, because I want every one of those to have a natural sense of arrival on the melody note. So F. So something I didn't do intuitively my concentrating on the leap. That's reasonable, it's simple, it's just about as simple as it can get. So that means ultimately it will be trustworthy. It's not yet trustworthy because in context, I'm still thinking of far too many things, including what happens next, what came before. But right now, I've passed positive judgment on this particular solution and gesture. Same thing has to happen there. Okay, so that one. Now, practicing this way, my first teacher, I spent 15 years with, would have called that practicing in mixed rhythms. I don't consider it that way anymore. In other words, we would impose different arrangement of notes in order to find whether there were relationships that needed to be practiced. If you always practice from the notation in the score, you will get the beamings to dictate to you your behavior or other elements of the scoring that might suggest a pianistic result that's not there, or a pianistic solution. So in this case, I'm looking for gestures that I know I need to be able to conquer. So I'm grouping things in accordance with whether there's an important leap or awkwardness or something that enables me to feel that idiomatic connection. So that's what I'm exploring. This one was easy. This is actually not hard either. Actually, not one of them taken alone. As you can see, by doing them in isolation like that, I get immediately better success. I still have to remind myself that my right hand, until I know it really well, needs that particular strategy for making it accurate, approaching the keyboard directly. For perfection here, I'm working for that deliciousness of experience that says that's going to work. Okay, and I need to remind myself of the C. This is particularly true when you have a melody that has notes isolated by other figuration, that it's not enough, as it would be if this figure were as it is earlier on. If it were under my hand in a hand position or a simple grouping, when I'm forced to go like this, sorry, there you go. To know the second, the third, so if I remind myself of that, at last they're all white notes, so I don't feel where I am under my hand well. I have to direct my attention to those keys. So D, A, and then this series of thirds, all white notes. And then the outline of an A minor chord. So it's like a B half diminished chord coming down A minor. It's the easiest way I can think of. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Consider success. That's, again, it's going to need a lot of reinforcement, but I fleshed it out, so I add that to my blueprint of things that I know will work. 45, 46, 48. Okay, home stretch, it's the last page. Okay, I look at my left hand and I see it's jumping around like crazy, not with difficulty, but I'll obviously need to concentrate on those, in spite of the fact that melodically the primary voice is my right hand. In terms of attention and execution, the left hand is by far the part that needs my mental input. We talked about that before. A 5-note group ending with 5th finger and then a skip. Okay, so this includes a series of leaps. 8th note, isolated 8th note, and then an octave above it. Is very much, for those of you who know the Mephisto waltz of Liszt, the same kind of thing, although this is much slower, but I use exactly the same technique, which is to say, I come away from the keyboard on the 2nd finger, gives me a perfect trajectory to reapproach the keyboard for the octave. So I love those kinds of passages. Here's F sharp, for example, and A, and G, and B flat. Every one of these is approached with that kind of technique. So, F sharp. Okay, I'm going to have to know those notes because they jump around too much to be anywhere near under my hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, that's a self-contained unit because this is where the leap starts. So it's essence. There's a dramatic climb. If I take out alternate beats or alternate big beats, I have F sharp climbing to G up here, climbing to A flat or G sharp as it's called here. And the other ones are the intervening ones. So if I simply think F sharp goes to G, which goes to G sharp. Now, I have to have a way of explaining these. These, by contrast, if they were all in the same octave, it would be that. So I'm thinking this, and this, and this, and that. So it's memorized in essence. And this one. And I do like to stress the difference, well, the pejorative quality that the word memorization has. I may have talked about this before. It certainly bears repeating. Too often, certainly in the teaching profession and in the academic world of music, we talk about memorization as the thing you do for an occasion, a jury, a contest, or whatever, rather than just as a way of recognizing that you really, really know a piece, that it's been so internalized that the score is within you as well as without. And there are so many instances like this where the internalization is necessary because you're jumping around, your eyes need to be looking at the keyboard, and the score will be unduly distracting you. So the more you understand and have assimilated and internalized what makes the piece work, the less you have to consider memorization. It's not an imposition on what you can already play well. It's one of the reasons that you play well because you have a heightened sense of where you're going and what you're doing, of how the patterns work, of what works harmonically and melodically and rhythmically and structurally, and all those things become part of your understanding and your ability to be more persuasive. So that's why it's so important as you go along to not keep the music almost literally at arm's length at the score on the rack, but rather to find ways of describing it in your own terms and learn it to the point where you can take it personally. So, left hand, the right hand rather, is starting to jump around comfortably. Meanwhile, the left hand okay. one measure worth of chromatically major thirds. You'll see again I'm modeling, which is to say, rather than practicing it a lot from the leaps, I'm practicing it for my mind and my ear, so I get a sense of where it's going, and it turns into perfect fourths. Okay, and it's worth noting that although the top note repeats, I go and then start on the E, and then start here. So those are three interlocking chromatic scales. The bottom notes, until the measure later, 49, 50, 51, 52, the bottom voice always moves down chromatically. So that's interesting. Now, having described it to myself, that was an example of me making a mistake that I knew was a mistake. I ought to be able to play those, in essence, for memory. Okay, now those, and then I haven't really looked at the third one is tritones. Now, unlike boom chick all the way down, the tritones sit in perfect fifths, and finally the perfect fifth expands at the end of the fourth measure of this passage to a sixth. Keeps climbing chromatically downward by sixth. As Prokofiev likes a lot, he's going to start a pedal point when he reaches his bottom, which is way down on this tritone, which is F and B. So we have major thirds, perfect fourths, tritone, and I should have told myself that the top note, the D flat, is repeated, and it also gives me the hook of that wonderful fingering, 5-2, which is, as I've noted before, one of my favorite fingerings. So 5-2 to 4-1, and then probably 5-2 to 4-1 on top. So this. Not bad. Okay. It's not perfectly memorized, and you notice that time I played it with score. I wanted to reinforce, but the primary reason I'm going to need to have that ultimately memorized is because the right hand is jumping around too. So I'm going to be constantly distracted geographically, and I will need to be very conscious of what I look at. I'm going to do this rather slow. Fourths. Okay, here's where the octaves start in the right hand. How nice. When they start, that's also when Prokofiev gives me a little space with those longer notes in the bottom. Again, I'm a huge fan of good fingerings, and this chord at the top, A, E, A, almost always, unless it's a transition fingering from one kind of chord to another, I'll always finger that 1, 3, 5, because the spacing of the middle key, in this case E, which is a fifth above the low note, makes 1, 3, 5 far more comfortable for me than 1, 2, 5, or at least far more utilitarian. And by contrast, if it were a D, I would use second. So, that wasn't bad. Wasn't great, certainly wasn't fluid. Okay, so here, this is on the fourth beat. So I can get that far. I have to remember that that's where the perfect fourth comes in. And an F on top in the middle. Still ill at ease about that fourth. scared, or I, as represented by my right hand, got scared. Okay. Okay, we go on. Now the octaves. G, F sharp, wait, and A. I'm going to go back to that leapy part because it bears repeating. Here we go. 2 F sharp. Nope. 2 F sharp. The fingering helps me out. The 5-2 turning to 4-1. Or white-black turning to black-white. Very comfortable. So, good. And then A. So, let me see if I can get those together. F sharp. Not bad. Yeah, again, I'm nowhere near fluency here, but I have a strategy in mind. I've laid out a blueprint for what I'm going to follow. I've found a good fingering, I've found a good sense of gesture, a good sense of grouping. I even know more or less where I'm going to have to shift my attention. And the fluency will come from making each of the little subgroups work well and then combining several of them together. And then an advantage, emotionally speaking, is that Prokofiev simplifies certainly the rhythm in the right hand and then the stopping notes in the left hand as opposed to continuous eighth notes. And the result of that is that there's a strong sense of arrival on this chord at 253. So now I get to start something new. Again, thematically familiar material. I know I haven't talked about this historically much. This is, of course, one of the 3 wartime sonatas written during the Second World War, and you can certainly, if you're looking for programmatic elements, you can hear the ugliness coming in. You can hear the ominous nature. You can hear the power and the gloom and the dark and the whatever. And certainly, it doesn't require a stretch of the imagination to hear that in here in this insistent quality, this pedal figure that he is the kind of figure that he uses so often, certainly in these sonatas and elsewhere. Slight fingering decisions need to be made. This is a 10th. There's an augmented 5th in here. Going back and forth between G sharp and E and C, B. For me it's just 5-2 to 3-1. But it's worth noting that because otherwise I might go to 4, which is not terrible, but I don't have to move my arm back as far to the left by using 3. Although I do want to favor to make my hand as neutral as possible in my arm-hand relationship. I will swivel to deliver my hand so that thumb and 3 get to the keyboard more nearly together. If I stay too much in the position favored by 2 and 5 on G sharp and E, I'll have to make far too much of a strain for my thumb to get to the keyboard. This way it even adds a slur, so the connection is kind of nice for me. And the next one is actually the span of a minor ninth. It's much simpler, even though the fingering is reverse what the standard finger comfort level would be. In other words, with second on a white note and 5 on a black note, if this weren't a small enough interval, that would feel lousy. This is a big interval, but it feels okay because it optimizes the long and short relationship. Now reverse. Here, I think I will use, I have a perfect 5th going to a diminished octave, B flat. So here I'm going to use 4th for the little octave. So I have 3 different intervals, or 3 different kinds of fingers. The 3 works twice in a row, 3 again, and then 4 white note fourths, major and tritone. Doesn't matter that they're a major and tritone. For our ear it does. For the hand it matters not at all. So 1, 2, 5. And I'm going to put 2, 5 down at the bottom because it would be a colossal waste of energy to use my thumb down there. I'd have to move my whole hand. With 2 and 5, I've got almost the rest of the octave closer to the center of my body, to where I was. Much easier to grab, and I don't have to move in so far. I can actually fall out toward my body if I want to. For the second finger. Okay, I have to turn my hand a bit when there's an A sharp added, because it's 2 white notes and the black note, and in this case the thumb on the black note demands that I swivel a bit. Again, I try to keep my arm-hand relationship as neutral as possible. So I move my torso for comfort. And you can see me turning my hand and arm back, and I have to go down here to B and F sharp. Again, it's a comfortable fingering for that kind of chord, but the angle would change the further I get up. The more I go down to the bottom of the keyboard, the more neutral this angle is, the easier it is to play that fifth, just by having my arm deliver my hand diagonally to the keys. I wouldn't want to attempt that. It would be a complete waste of time, and it wouldn't feel good. So, actually, interesting that what I said and what I did were a little bit 2 different things. I told myself to go straighter, and I noticed myself swiveling, probably because of what I did earlier on. So, it's actually much easier to just retreat from the keyboard and go back to it. Okay. 1, 3, 5 for the 3. I really don't need to notate this. 1, 3, 5. Just what I said before about the right hand. The middle note is closer to the bottom. A fourth and then a fifth. So I go 1, 3, 5 here too. Probably 2, 5 on the GE because I can grab that easily. And another reason is my second hasn't been involved on the black note chord here. So it makes that part of my hand feel that much freer. As you can see, it's not hard to do without looking. Oh, he does that an awful lot, so I'm not going to repeat it for you. I'm not even going to count. Okay, we'll get to that later. So let's see what happens. We've just arrived at 253, assuming I've counted these measures that weren't ever counted by the publisher properly. Okay, so a decision has to be made about interaction. I've got this chord and this chord overlapping, so that's this. Tight. If you want the big accent that Prokofiev has indicated, maintaining the division is a good thing. It gives me a more incisive right hand, or at least those 2 notes are being more incisive. So far I'm living with it. Shift. That's again nice to note that this motive comes in spite of the shifting accompaniment, it comes in the same place on F. So, F. Interesting. I hadn't noticed that before about this cross-hand situation. My right hand has plenty of time to get there, actually to overshoot and be there before the left hand does, because it has a rest. So it's going like this. Right hand shifts, and the left hand comes to join it. Which you wouldn't normally think of, you'd think, because the right hand is way up here. It will come and join the left hand at the last moment. It actually should be in place. So, be in place, and then have the left hand find its way. So if I give that a rhythm, it's both left, right, left. Articulated the right hand, which I'm not above doing, but then they actually play at the same time. So, fairly high to stay out of my way. Well, that's going to be easy. Shift. Interestingly enough, same chord in the right hand, but this time the left hand is playing black notes. So the interaction is completely different from way underneath. Okay, left hand is staying the same, and I need to learn my right hand here. There are very few fingerings indicated, printed here, but this is one of them. In 3, 4, 5, 6, 257, 8, 9. You can see that I'm trying very hard not to cheat and prepare too much in advance of these taping sessions or video sessions. 50, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62. Okay, so at 61 with pickup, somebody has indicated a fingering because it's a really awkward figuration. I haven't necessarily bought into it, but I always try the editor's fingering once at least. Okay. It feels like the kind of thing where you shrug your shoulders and say, boy, that doesn't feel very good, but there's no other choice. And I think that's why Prokofiev or someone has bothered to write it in. It's just a very awkward little position. Not that awkward. And for me, fine. It's weird. Sorry, this is a quarter. And I can even play legato. So all should be well. Let's see, I'm here. Continuing, so I need a fingering, some parallel fifths, perfect fifths, then a sixth going to a seventh. So the sixth, which has black and white, the C sharp A, for me is almost a no-brainer. I'm going to go 5-2, and then the immediately ensuing seventh, I'll go 4-1. So. I'll go 5-1 to 4-2 to 3-1. Some of that fingering may be redundant, but it works. I could do other things, but that works nicely. Is that right? Yes, it is. At least according to this. This one has a C sharp in it, then a C natural. Since I don't have enough basis on which to go, in other words, I haven't recently heard the piece. The significance of that C natural is only because I see it and because I notice it. So I don't have a means of comparison yet. Very often when you're teaching a very, very familiar piece, you've heard it or played it so many times that it's unfamiliarity when someone is playing wrong notes or wrong rhythms or something like that. It's such an easy thing. You don't have to peer at the music. In this case, I need to peer at the music because I can't trust my ear alone and my experience alone. So what I will do is circle it and put a question mark and then do a little bit of research on it. So, but I like the change. The left hand is still ramping the way it was before. Okay, and then the key signature changes. Ostensibly, we are back in A, or an A-ish quality at this point. Prokofiev's intent. There's an E natural that I keep misplaying here. I keep wanting to play E sharp, so let me get that in my brain. Okay. Well, it feels a certain way as well. This major sixth. Oops. Yeah, something like that. And back to this important figure, and back to that A. That's, I think, how Prokofiev insists on A, keeps coming up with that pedal fifth, shall we call it. And I don't mean it as a pedal dominant pedal, but it's got the dominant and the tonic both in it, and the chord itself represents a pedal-like establishment. So, and there's the AC. So, AE. What are we doing in the left hand? That's changed. The approach is very interesting because after all those chromaticisms, we have one of those again, which really reminds me a little bit at the beginning of that interesting diminished thing that I cannot find. Oh yes, of course. When the left hand is playing this. For some reason, I feel an echoing of sorts there. Why not? In this case, E sharp, and it's subito piano. I don't know for sure what I'll play on top. Could play 3-5 on the bottom, but I think I might do 2 just because it's so darn comfortable. So I might go 1-4-2-5, and the extra advantage there is I don't repeat any finger. So I get this nice mini sixth and maxi fourth tritone down here. That's very nice. I'm sold on it. So. To get used to the sonority and the sensation. And now, oh, back to the same thing. How nice. Pianissimo this time. And there's an augmentation. This figure before was 1, 2, 3, 4, and now it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we're softer and we're slower in essence. That's certainly not right. Because I know enough about the piece to know how many resonances of the other movements there are later on. We're going to have at the very, very end of the piece, the fourth movement, that same thing, with the A motive of the first movement happening there. So. Because I want an absolutely hair-raising, terrifying kind of sound at the end. I have to make absolutely sure that I don't make any attempt to use my fingers to play these, but I toss my arm for each one as if I were playing something like that. It's octave technique for thirds. So it's minor, it stays minor, it doesn't change. Minor, major, but so wonderful with the 3 A's and the 1 B flat to add the discord and the ugliness. I have to decide. I could go, obviously, the safest thing is to go 1-5 at the very end, but I would consider going 1-3 if I want, or 4 and 5 together. Maximum ugliness. Okay, in any event, I've reached the end of the first movement for the first time. So much to recoup. so much to review because I had days off, many days off. But at the very least, good things, good experiences, good feelings, and a sense that I know where I'm going. That always feels better than having a feeling that you practice and there's sort of a bottomless pit. You pour all your best intentions and your time into the pit, and it swallows up everything you have to offer. You have to know when to quit, when the law of diminishing return sets in. And if at all possible, you have to be able to identify where the emotional payoff is in a practice session. Like I got, even in this page in a little bit, lots of payoff from noting that, this fingering works, this is comfortable, or this figure is duplicable, or I get it, I get some sense of what Prokofiev was after. Any of those can give you motivation. Some of them make me giddy with delight. Some of them are just curious and interesting. Some of Prokofiev's decisions are still a little puzzling, and some might stay somewhat puzzling. But I have to forge as much as possible a personal relationship with this material so that certainly physically, intellectually, and emotionally, I feel bound to what I'm going to be saying with the piece. And I feel good about the fact that we're almost on a first name basis now, and then we have to really get to know one another. See you soon.